Okay, greeting everyone. Today we have the distinct honor of welcoming Dr. Judene Pretti, a renowned expert in work integrated learning. Dr. Pretti is the Director of Business Services for Cooperative and Experiential Education at the University of Waterloo, and she also a Senior Advisor at the Work Learn Institute. Her extensive research has profoundly enriched our understanding of will, with particular focus on cooperative education, organizational socialization, and the development of professional identities. Additionally, she serves as an associate editor for the International Journal of Work Integrated Learning, further shaping the field through her editorial contributions. Dr. Pretty's remarkable work has earned her recognition, including the Dr. Graham Branton Research Award from Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada. We are truly privileged to have Dr. Pretty here with us today to share her valuable insights. Dr. Pretty, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know, it wasn't that long ago that I was a research student myself, and I did my my master's degree when I was early in my career, and then decided that wasn't enough, and I went back and did my my PhD later in my career. So congratulations to all of you who are pursuing graduate degrees, and this is an exciting field to be doing your research and work in, and it's my pleasure to be here with you. It's tonight for me and in the morning for most of you, I understand. I will share my slides. So you have the, just make sure I can still see your faces and slides at the same time. There we go. So you have hopefully had a chance to read the article that this lecture is going to be based on. I will be happy to answer questions that you might have. We can take different, maybe at various points during the lecture, I'll pause, and if there are things that you want to ask questions, please feel free to do that. When I was asked to prepare this lecture, one of the topics that I thought would be particularly relevant to share with you is about work integrated learning partnerships. So lots of different types of experiential education, and you may have read different types of classifications. So what is work integrated learning versus experiential learning versus specific models like cooperative education or practicums or internships. Those are all different words used to describe models that have variations in them. But one of the distinctive parts in my mind for work integrated learning, in particular as compared to the more broad experiential learning bucket, would be that there's a partner involved in the support of the student learning when it comes to work integrated learning. So sometimes that's an employer, sometimes that's a community partner, but there's someone sort of involved in the experience that goes beyond a traditional classroom environment. And so given how important that relationship is, and given the challenges that can come about in managing those relationships with those external parties, I thought that would be a good topic for this lecture. I want to start by acknowledging the work of my co-authors on this paper. This was a real pleasure for me to partner with a colleague from Australia and a colleague from New Zealand. I had the privilege of going to an ASIN conference a number of years ago. And as part of that conference, they ran a research workshop in the day before the conference. And so that was a place for me to meet Jenny and Kath. And we talked about our sort of common or shared interest in understanding the employer partner perspective in will. And so through that day came up with a research project, which then we managed to get a ASIN research grant to do, which then gave us the opportunity to pursue the research that we had looked at. So I'm going to be sharing with you today about that research project. And then I'll, this particular publication, as you'll have noticed, is a number of years old at this point. But one of the things that I thought would be of particular interest is that the 3 different schools and co-op or will programs that we were associated with were very different. And so in some ways, this is a nice piece of research in that it's not just painting the picture of one particular institution, one country, one type of work integrated learning. It really touched on a number of different types of programs. And so that's sort of where I'll start, is introducing the 3 the schools of the 3 different participants for this research. In New Zealand, Jenny Fleming's university was the University of Auckland, AUT. And Jenny was responsible for a sport and recreation co-op program. And that was compulsory, so it was a mandatory component of their program. It was 350 hours in a part-time capacity over the course of the degree. So when I described to you what Waterloo's co-op program is, this is very different. Mostly unpaid, often in school settings where students would go in and help with the sports programs at particular schools. And in her case, excuse me, she engaged with 150 to 200 host organizations each year. Then the Australian context, so Kath, that was part of the team, she was in a program called the Professional and Community Engagement. So very different than the co-op model where students in Waterloo's case are paid. Instead, this was embedded in courses. So this was mostly 3rd year, a variety of different types of disciplines for the students, and over 2,000 students involved in those courses in a given year. So higher volume, but different way in which the students were engaging in community and industry. And then my context is the University of Waterloo. So Waterloo has a co-op program that is part of what the university was founded on 65 years ago. We have co-op happens across all 6 of our faculties. And it works differently in that students alternate between 4 months of paid co-op, then they come back and do 4 months more of their degree. While they're doing that 4 months of their degree, they're applying, looking for their next 4 months. So typically our students work in 4 to 6 different companies over the course of their undergraduate degree in those 4-month increments, and they are paid. And because of the size of our program, we have about 6,000 employer partners across 60 countries. So hopefully this paints a picture of the breadth of the types of programs and employers that we were surveying as part of this study, as well as the staff involved in running these programs, because I think that's what is part of what makes our findings so powerful, is that we had 3 very different contexts that we were drawing from. But in all 3 of our cases, it's really important that we figure out how to best identify and develop partner relationships. often small WIL programs will rely on sort of personal relationships. So I happen to know person at company A, and I say, would you be willing to take a student? And they say, sure, we'll take one. That kind of relationship is quite common in WIL, but also not very sustainable or scalable. And so how can we identify what the key factors are to building relationships that last beyond that personal connection point? Because as budgets tighten, as there are more pressures within community and industry, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to say yes to taking on students unless it's clear what the value add is for them and their organizations. I think probably what is here are many of the things that I just mentioned. So because work integrated learning experiences rely so heavily on that relationship, it's really important that we think about what factors are going to contribute to a positive relationship. The last thing we want to do is invest in bringing in a new employer. They don't have a good experience, and so they don't come back. When we're able to identify a new employer, what are the ways that we can be investing in that relationship to have it continue? And I'm not sure if this is true in your context as well, but certainly in the Canadian North American context, increasingly students are looking for work integrated learning as part of their university college experience. And so there's more and more competition amongst the universities to get partners, to get their students into those companies and organizations. And the successful engagement is dependent on and relies on leadership to ensure accessibility and flexibility. So again, back to the scenario of it's a friend or it's a colleague that's willing to take a student. The most successful relationships are going to be the ones where senior leaders see the value in bringing students into the organization and continue to support and advocate for that. So those are some of the things we sort of knew as practitioners going into this research, but what we wanted to do was develop a framework and test a framework that would identify what those critical success factors looked like. We wanted to we felt that our having 3 different contexts would be really particularly relevant for this research, because if the factors were similar across the 3 contexts, that would show more generalizability of the framework. We wanted to take a look at existing engagement models and frameworks that might be applicable to WIL. So obviously lots of industry, lots of research on partnerships, on relationships. We wanted to look at how that research might be relevant for WIL. And tied to that, examine what models and frameworks would be useful for addressing the challenges and complexity of WIL. So in WIL programs, one of the trickiest parts in some ways is the matching supply and demand. So you may have more students than you have industry partners, and that's not a good situation. And then it's also not a good situation to have more industry partners than students, because then they're going to go find other places to find the students. So being able to find that balance is one of the trickiest parts in operationalizing work integrated learning. So we took an action research approach to this study. And what that meant was we identified the topic and created bounds around what we were going to look at. So we sort of scoped what research we were going to look at as far as our literature review. and then could follow up with a critique of that literature, what was applicable to will, what needed to be extended, or where were the gaps. Then based on that, we designed a framework, and then we tested it. So I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail each of these three stages. So in phase one, we did three things. So the first thing we did was do a document analysis. So each of us in our respective programs had documents, best practices guides, things that our employer-facing teams used in building and maintaining the relationships. Everything from sort of best practices guides to even the job descriptions of our employer-facing staff that indicated the kinds of responsibilities that they had in their roles. We also looked at did a literature review. So there are bodies of literature that talk about relationships, and we were specifically, if you think of research relationships that universities have with industry, there is research that talks about what best practices are in those kind of relationships, which that was interesting to us because it's crossing the same boundary. So it's crossing the boundary between academic institution and corporate partners, just for a different purpose. And so we were interested in what that research said. And then we had the opportunity to talk to practitioners from New Zealand and Australia in discussion forums. So those were people whose roles it was to interact with employers. And so we were interested in hearing from them, what do you think are the things that are most important in building relationships with will partners? So this slide highlights some of the references that you'll have seen in the article, sort of three categories of research that we looked at. So one was the community university engagement. So there's a whole body of research around community engaged learning, the ways in which the universities are reaching out to and supporting their communities is a body of research. So not specifically will, but more at a broader level. Then the industry university partnerships, the one I spoke about was specifically research. It was the most common theme in why industry and universities form partnerships, and then more generically industry to industry experiences. So we were looking through those articles to find examples of frameworks, examples of key factors. That was what we were looking for when we dove into those. So in this first phase, some of the key findings that we had were that there were implicit and explicit factors that were relevant to building long-term relationships. This became particularly clear when we spoke to the practitioners. So there were things that they didn't name necessarily, or they didn't, when we asked them the question of what are the factors, they had some, but they didn't necessarily have all of them. And what we realized is much of that was that it's just the way they do their work. And so it was hard for them to specifically call out some of the factors that had been documented in the literature, because it's just so much about how they go about doing their jobs. The other thing the other things that came out were often about legal and contractual mechanisms. So when you think of a relationship between a university and a corporate partner to pursue research, they would never do that without written contracts in place, where that doesn't necessarily necessarily translate. In some cases, some will programs do have contracts with corporate partners. Our institution would never be able, we would never be able to scale that part to have 60, to have, we're about 10,000 students a term. So 10,000 contracts with employers signed within a 4-month period for them to go out and work. And the way that we get around, or the reason we don't need that, is because the students are being paid, and therefore the contract is between the student and the employer, not between the university and the employer. But there are some situations where that would be a requirement to consider. The other sort of broader categories that came up when we looked at the literature were management and organizational issues, some related to political issues, some social, and some about capacity and resources. So when you see the framework that we drafted and then we tested, you'll see some of those pieces embedded within that. The issues that were identified often translated to a specific factor that we wanted to look at. And so I think I might pause there just in case that I've 20 minutes of talking. Are there any questions about phase 1 at this point? And it's okay if there aren't, but. We're good to keep going? Good to keep going? Okay. So this is what our proposed framework looked like. And there is a significance to the so the 3 around the outside: communication, compatibility, and commitment. Those sort of rose to the top when we had conversations and when we looked at what themes crossed all the literature. It was common for it to reference. It's hard to imagine a partnership that isn't reliant on communication. Communication in one form or another. So we purposely put the communication one along the bottom as sort of the foundation for all key factors. And then we picked 2 other C words, which were compatibility and commitment. And those 2 also rose to the top in that they're connected to a number of the triangles and seem to sort of be an overarching. So if we needed to boil it down to 3 things, communication, compatibility, and commitment were sort of the overarching top 3 pieces. And then what we did was we looked at these other 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. The other 9 factors connect to at least 1, in some cases 2 or 3 of the overarching ones. So I'll show you what that looks like here. I think it's a little bit clearer in the slide than it may have been in the article. So what we found, or what we proposed, and I'll tell you how we tested it in a minute, but what we proposed was that there are 4 things connected to compatibility. So reciprocity is a really important piece, and you'll see when we get to the findings a really interesting one when you think about the contrast between our programs, where our program is paid. The students are paid for the work that they're doing in industry, as compared to the other 2 where it's a volunteer position for the students. So we had quite a bit of discussion amongst the 3 researchers amongst us about the role of reciprocity, because in my context, it's very important that the organization feels they're getting value for the relationship that they're engaging in, not just with the university, but with paying the student. But it turns out reciprocity was important for all 3 models. So the idea is that it's a win-win relationship, that there's value in it on both sides. Variations in purpose. So when we talk about compatibility, it's not that they have that the partner and the institution have the same reason for engaging in the relationship, but their reasons for engaging in the relationship are compatible. They share a vision for why they want to participate in WIL. And in most cases, that's about the development of the student. That's about contributing to the workforce of the future. In the case of the university, it's about the students getting the skills they need to be successful. In the case of the organization, it's about investing in their future talent pipeline. Learning is seen as the core of the experience. Knowledge is shared. So again, this is a compatibility one where we see both the universities or the academic institutions needing to learn from the organizations, the partner organizations, about what's working in the program, what's not working, and similarly, how the organizations that are partnering with us are learning and growing. So another label that might be appropriate here is like thinking of it as continuous improvement. So investing in that ongoing learning of what's working, what's not working, and how to advance that. Another one that was very strong in all the research, all the different types of partnerships, was about reputation. So the idea that reputation is enhanced by partnering was something that was really important. And obviously that means that if there's organizations that don't share the university's values, then it may not make sense to partner for WIL experiences with those organizations. And similarly, the organizations may decide that there's some academic institutions that don't have a reputation that would be in their best interests. So it's about compatibility with respect to how reputations are perceived. And then expectations. Expectations are identified and understood to create that compatibility. So that's one of the C's. The second C is commitment. And commitment for us was tied into six of the triangles. So trust, reputation, recognition, coordination, again, the learning, and resources. So with commitment, again, in each of our contexts, commitment looked different. So for some of us, commitment was making sure the student is paid. Like for my institution, making sure the student is paid, and that they have the supervisor that's supporting them, that they have a safe environment to work in, and so that's probably the appropriate resources at the bottom. Mutual trust. So I think that one probably self-explanatory, but the idea of being committed to one another means that you trust. So they trust that we are going to help if there's a situation with a student. They trust that they're going to get good service from the institution, and we're trusting that they're going to take good care of the students when the students are with them. Commitment is also fostered through, again, that building on reputation. So the more we're reinforcing each other's reputation, the more commitment is going to be created. Recognition. This was a really interesting one. You'll see when we get to the findings that recognition wasn't necessarily at the top of the list. And yet, in my opinion, I think it's an area where we do need to pay some attention to how institutions are recognizing their employer partners and the important contribution that those employers are making to their students' learning. But it can be something that doesn't always happen. Commitment develops through ongoing coordination. This is in some ways one of the reasons why WIL programs tend to be pretty expensive to run, because there is a need for faculty, prof, staff time to invest in the relationships with external partners. Attention to what is learned through the continuous improvement process, so similar to the previous slide on compatibility, and then ensuring the appropriate resources are available for on both sides, the institution side and the organization side. And then the third C is communication. So to the point that I made earlier, critical is the foundation. So the reason we put it at the bottom of the triangle. And we identified 6 aspects of the triangle success factors that relate to communication. So it's pretty hard to have coordination without communications. So it's an essential part. Communication helps with expectations. So, regular communication around this is what this program looks like. This is what we're hoping the student is going to get out of participating in this experience. Sometimes that can feel, I think for some of our external partner facing staff, that can feel worrying that we're going to scare the partners away by setting expectations that we're not sure they can meet. But the reality is that being clear and communicating what the expectations are is going to result in better outcomes for the student and the ongoing relationship. So you might not the first time and it turns out that it works out, and you might not communicate appropriately and it turns out it doesn't, and then that sort of relationship is gone. So the idea of communicating expectations is something that really came up in the research as being really important. Communication is the way in which that learning is shared amongst the partners. Communication is the way that contributions can be recognized. It ensures the reciprocity. So, we're not speculating, we're not guessing as to what value the partner is getting out of it and what value we're getting out of it. We're being clear about that, which then leads to the development of trust and understanding. So that's phase 2. So phase 1 was the literature review, the discussion forums with the practitioners to be able to generate this as the framework for those critical success factors. So that was the end of phase 2. And then maybe I'll pause there again. Any questions about phase 2? No, we're good. Okay. So phase 3 was, how do we test this? So we had a theory that these 9 things within those 3 categories are sort of under the umbrella of communication, compatibility, and commitment were important. But we wanted to do some validation on ensuring that we had it right. So we did surveys. We did surveys both with people who worked in WIL roles within academic institutions. So that's the academics at NZACE. NZACE is now known as NZ WIL or WIL NZ. And then we also did a survey with host partners. So in my case, employers. In the case of Macquarie and AUT, their host partners. And then we did another discussion forum at Australian conference. So I'm going to read these because I think it's important to be clear how we communicated to the participants what we meant by each of these things, because a word like learning may have a different meaning to each of us. And so if I'm asking you to evaluate how important learning is in your will relationship, in order to be confident that we were measuring the same thing, we wanted to have clear definitions. So we defined learning as the core of the experience where knowledge and information is shared and partners are learning from each other at different times and in different ways. For vision, we identified it as shared values that are aligned and that there's agreed purpose for the relationship. Reciprocity, that there are mutual benefits that create a win-win for each of the partners. For expectations, that expectations are identified, communicated, and understood. Resources, we specified resources as being human and facilities, that they're available, and that capacity constraints are considered. For recognition, we talked about it as acknowledgement of the value of the partnership and the contributions of each of the partners. So this one was important because sometimes you think of recognition as like awards, and it doesn't necessarily need to be awards. It could be just a thank you note at the end of the term. The student really appreciated it. Thank you for hosting them. Coordination, so the effective planning, preparation, and evaluation occur and is responsive to the needs of the partner. The reputation of the institution and organization is acknowledged, developed, and protected in the relationship. And we define trust as mutual trust among partners is developed and commitment to the relationship is evident. So those were the factors that we included in the survey. And the findings that we had from the survey of academics, so these are the people within the higher ed university, that work in the will space. They considered all of the 9 factors to be important. It had a mean score of at least 4 out of 5. So if you picture those 9 things being listed, how important is each of these to the success of your will partnerships? Each of the things got rated at least 4 out of 5. And the highest score was trust, and the lowest score was resources. And so keep those 2 things in mind when I show you what our employer partners shared with us, because it looks a little different than that. One of our participants said, I really like the proposed framework as it captures the essence of successful relationships, partnerships. Consideration should be given to the difference between institutional level partnerships and relationships between individual academics and supervisors. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, because often the level of the relationship is often undefined. So is this a relationship between the University of Waterloo and Google, where the students are employed? Or is this a relationship between person at the University of Waterloo who is the advisor for the student and the supervisor at Google? So how we think about which of these factors are important in which time and place may depend on that level. So if you think about, I'm just going to go back here, so it's a little bit easier to look at. If you think about reputation is probably at the higher, more institutional company level, as opposed to something that the individual supervisor and the academic lead are thinking about. For them, it may be more about trust, or it may be more about expectations, whereas at the senior level, it may be vision, it may be reputation. So just wanted to make that distinction, because I thought that quote was a really important way to think about how you might use this framework. So then we moved to an industry survey, and you'll see there we had 68 responses from Macquarie partners. We had 40 from AUT partners and 298 from Waterloo. You'll see the split in the types of organizations that were that responded to the survey. So for commercial, 49% of Waterloo's sample were companies, corporations, not-for-profit. Only 9% of UW was for not-for-profit versus 45 and 47% for Macquarie. So a really different demographic in terms of the organizations that are responding. Government, we had about the same percentage of our sample that came from government, and similarly from public. So the biggest difference was between the commercial and the not-for-profits, where UW was more on the commercial corporate side, and the other two were more on the not-for-profit. As you'll see, there are industries that responded to this were quite varied. So everything from education, sports and fitness, finance, health, manufacturing, professional business, scientific and business, professional service, scientific and business. And we had different sizes of organizations represented in the sample. So it was a really nice mix of companies that participated in the survey. And so similarly to the academics, they were asked, of these 9 factors, how important is the following? And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because there's a lot to digest on this slide. A couple of things that I would point out. Actually, you know what? I'm going to flip to the next slide and we're going to come back to this one. So we asked this question in 2 ways because, as you can probably imagine, it's pretty easy to say these are all important. Like when I gave you the explanation of what we mean by all of them, you probably thought, yeah, that makes sense. Those all seem like valid factors. One of the questions, which maybe isn't fair for me to ask, but maybe you've given it some thought, is part of your assignment, I think, was to critique this research. And so if I was going back and critiquing this research, I would say we should have thrown things in this list that weren't supported in the literature, that we don't think really contribute positively to successful relationships, to see if these 9 things would come to the top as the most important factors. So this is a hindsight. If I were to design the survey again, I'd probably throw some extra ones in there just to see if these were in fact the top 9. But the way we tried to go at it was both to say, is this factor important? Learning, shared vision, reciprocity, list them all out. But then we also asked them to rank them. And so this gave us a little bit different data. So this was, if you were dragging and dropping in a list, where would you put the most important ones? So it's easy for everyone to say, yep, that's important, yep, yep, yep. But when we force them to say which of these things is more important, then we got, in some ways, a little bit more interesting data. And what jumps out to me at this list anyway is that trust and clear expectations, despite the fact that our programs were very different, the employers responding to the surveys came from very different contexts. Some were paying the students, some weren't paying the students, some were North America, some were Australia, New Zealand. And yet those 2 rose to the top as being 1 and 2 across all 3 schools. So that was sort of our first reaction to it. Similarly, you'll see recognition scored least important or second least important, and reputation same. So the 2 top and the 2 bottom seem to cluster across all 3 of our institutions, or all 3 of our contexts and institutions, which felt really reassuring, that even though we were so different, that the responses that we got to the survey we're fairly consistent in those top factors and in the bottom factors. You'll notice reciprocity is third / fourth. And beyond that, it's a little bit here and there as far as what the ordering was, but nonetheless, it largely rank order was fairly similar across the three contexts. So I'll go back to the other one in a minute, but just wanted to say that one of the reasons I wanted to share this particular research with you was, one, because I can easily point out something I would do differently now in the design of that previous slide, in that I would throw some, I would throw some extra factors in here to see if these were the 9 that really truly were the most important. And also to have you think about, when you're designing surveys, the idea of how wording a question in a slightly different way gets you different insights. So if we hadn't asked that ranking question, I'm not entirely sure what I would have done with this data that you're seeing here. I think I would have said, okay, it looks like we're largely on to something, and these are probably the most important factors because they all seem to be rating high. Noticing that this reputation one is definitely, reputation and recognition stand out to some degree on this one, as well as being lower in importance. I think so. I have a couple of questions for you, but I think these are basically the key points that I just shared with you. So all factors were considered important, both from the industry and the academic perspective. The clear expectations and trust had the highest mean scores. Reputation and recognition had the lowest. The consistency and level of importance of factors, despite our differences, I think is quite notable. And so I think this might be my last slide. Just give me a second, and then I have some questions for you. Yeah. So one of the things that was part of our ASIN grant was identifying how we would make use of this research. So now that we have identified this framework, how might we go about using it? So each of us sort of identified some key places. For me at Waterloo, we have different roles that are associated with, so some schools for work integrated learning have people who are responsible for both the students and advising the students and supporting them from a career perspective, as well as finding employers and building those relationships. At Waterloo, because of the scale that we operate at, we have different roles for those different functions. And so this research really does target our employer-facing roles. So we have account managers who are responsible for our existing employer relationships, and they're making annual meetings with the employers to update them on changes that are happening at Waterloo, or giving them reports on, this is the trends that we're seeing with the hiring that your company has been doing. We also have business developers, and so those are people who are assigned with coming in, bringing in new partnerships. And so one of the things that I was thinking about while I was doing this research was, which of these key factors is most important at the outset of a relationship, as opposed to once the relationship has been established, because that would be 2 different roles for us at Waterloo. And how can we use this tool to do training with our staff, to talk with them about both the challenges of building relationships and where the key points for them to be investing their time would be. Jenny at AUT mentioned that they were going to incorporate this into brochures for industry to sort of educate the industry side on things that are important to us and that we want to bring to a WIL partnership, kind of setting the expectations, like these are the things you can do on your end to be successful. At Macquarie, they felt that it would be helpful for them in managing strategy. So, how to identify and manage those relationships and scale. For the other thing that they wanted to do was to develop a scale. So back to that learning, how could we use these 9 factors as a way of doing a self-assessment on how are we doing in our programs in monitoring and improving the relationships that we have with employers. So it could be used kind of as a self-assessment or self-evaluation for programs to consider, and then identify areas where, we seem to be doing okay on this, but trust is not where it should be, and what strategies can we undertake to improve trust. So then the last slide I have here is for you, and I said, how might this framework be useful to you in your context? I could expand the question and say, in the research you're doing, how does this study contribute, whether it's the design of the study, whether it's the topic or the approach. And so yes, I'll turn it back to you, Professor Kunstrup.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pretti. Student, do you have any questions or point to discuss with Dr. Pretti? Go on.
So, can I ask some questions, please?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think in the phase 1, I saw that the key factors to motivate industry for WIL, which is included the legitimacy of legal mechanisms. So I'd like to know, like, is there any legal documents which is the provide the state governments of Canada, which is support, like, to build the relationship between the institutions and the industry?
So
It's a
documents that support, sorry, can you say that again?
Yes, the legal documents or the law or something which is support the relationships, like debate between the institutions and the industry. Yeah.
Legal documents, you said? Yes.
Yes. Especially from the
governments, got it. So there's a few things I can point you towards. In most cases, WIL falls into a gap in the legal framework, because they're not in some cases they're not employees, so they don't get covered under employment law, but and so there can be a risk for them. And so one of the things that's coming to mind, and I will pull up the link while we're chatting and put it in the chat. There's a lot of research that's been done. Craig Cameron from Australia has been an author on a number of papers. He's a lawyer by trade, and he's come into the WIL space in Australia, and so he's written quite a bit around legal frameworks for WIL, and so he would definitely be the expert I would recommend you take a look at.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, can I? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Pretti. I'm Dr. Sumitra. Actually, I'm graduate from this program already, but I would like to attend all
Oh,
of the class that Dr. Atit arranged because would like to upskill. I would like to get more knowledge from all of the speakers that Dr. Atit invited. Uh, Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to thank you. It's very good lecture that you provide all of the good information. And it's very good idea that you provide that about the length you transform instead of provide just only the score, you provide like ask the provide the information as a ranking instead of just only the score as a point. That's very good one that I would like to apply to my research. Just one thing that I would like to ask you during you do your research, do you concern about the culture because your on your research you do cross uh I mean from Canada, right? And in New Zealand and in Australia. Okay, New Zealand and Australia is really close cross country, but in Canada and New Zealand and Australia, is there any problem or any concern about culture in organization? I mean, in industrial sector, because when you survey in in industrial sector, they may in my idea they may have like uh different in culture in the industrial sector when they answer your survey because
yes.
the topic that I would like to just mention that if I would like to maybe expand about your research to Thailand, they may have like different answer if I apply to Thailand because they may have like different in culture in term when they answer the
Yeah.
survey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And despite the fact that I referenced many times the fact that we had three different contexts, I think they're probably all pretty similar in terms of workplace culture and even national culture. There's not a I don't think there's as much variation as there could and should be. So I think you're absolutely right that were we to replicate this research in other places, for example, Thailand, I think well, first of all, the translation of the definitions would need to be done in such a way that it would be meaningful to the participants, and I suspect it would reveal differences. I do think that even though we were talking about not for profit um, and corporate, I think it's still fairly similar. And so I think it would be really interesting to see a different culture put into this research. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And about your keywords that you got from your researches sounds interesting. That it's not just only to initiate some sustainable relationship with the partnership, but I may use to my lecture that I will groom my student before they go for co-op that they should do something to being a gap that close the gap to make the relationship
Right.
between the university and the workplace will be like stronger. Thank you very much for this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Is what is the student's role in this? I talked mostly about what the academic institution and what the organization, the host organization, can do, but how can the student contribute to these 9 things as well? As much as possible, we try to have students think of themselves as ambassadors for the university when they're in organizations. So yeah, that's another great layer to this. And congratulations on graduating.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just gonna, while people are thinking about questions, I'm just gonna pull up that Cameron legal study.
Yes, hello, Pretti. Yes, I'm from Laos.
Hello.
So I just listen to your presentation. It's interesting for me about the cooperative education. So I think it's so big, your research. Different countries, different culture, different action. Yes, but now I think the University of Auckland University of Technology. Yes, I interested to the field of recreation that meet
Yes.
the cooperative education because I graduated in my master degree in tourism. So maybe
Very
I will
good.
borrow I will borrow your
Yes.
research some to use as my research here.
Yes. Yes,
So
and I'd be happy to, sorry, go ahead.
yes. So it's I think it allows it's not easy to work with a partnership. So it's there is many procedures or process to do about this. So do you have any suggestion to how to do if we have many procedures or process to work with the partnership between the institution or workplace like this?
So
Thank you.
yes, so suggestions for what for partnerships with other institutions to do research or to find placements for students.
Yes, two, of course, between two.
But both the research
Both.
and the
Yes,
students.
yes, both.
Okay. So I think I'm actually not sure if there are any schools from Laos that are part of the World Association of Co-op, but I'll throw that link in as well. It's it's called WACE, and it's a global organization that supports work integrated learning in countries around the world. It's a great place to both learn from colleagues, but also to build partnerships. And I think SUT has been an active partner of WACE over the years, and so I think there's been a lot of benefits to the learning on all sides. So I'll add that information there. I think that's a good place to start. I think the other thing that I would say as far as a suggestion is what's so good about work integrated learning is there's such a broad a broad set of options that schools can implement that can be like the ones I described, where it's students going into a place that's part-time and unpaid, through to students being paid and maybe working internationally. And so I think the nice part about work integrated learning, when it's designed around how to help the students build skills that are going to be useful to them in the future and to get a window into the kind of career and work that they want to do, there's lots of different ways that can happen. And so one of the articles that's coming to mind is by some authors from, I think it was from Australia, who talked about innovation and work integrated learning and really talked about the whole spectrum of what that might look like. So I'll put that in the chat as well. I'm putting one of the Craig Cameron ones in. There's lots more of those ones. If you just look up Cameron and risk or legal, you'll find lots for him. Waste, I'll put up the waste link. WACE is taking place in June in Istanbul. Oh, sorry, May, maybe the end of May. Yeah, May 28th to May 30th. And the other one was
So not yet.
here's the innovation one. Okay.
Dr.
Any
Pretti,
other?
since our students will begin their own research project very soon, it would be invaluable for them to learn about common challenges in conducting research and strategies for overcoming them. Could you share the biggest challenges your team faced during the 3 phases of the project and how you overcome them?
Sure. Yeah, I'll comment in 2 ways. So this particular research, one of the challenges was that it was 3 of us, and I was in a very different time zone than they were, and so and really before Teams and Zoom were such a big thing. So the coordination was the hardest part in this research project, but beyond doing my own PhD research, to me, the draw in doing research has been to be collaborative, and part of what I enjoy most about doing research is learning about what's similar and different. So coming to definitions of things was difficult. Even survey questions where their employers or their partners would know it by one word, my employers wouldn't have known work integrated learning if I had used that term. They would only know co-op. And so some of the challenges were around terminology across different contexts. If I think about my own individual research and the challenges, I laugh only because there are lots of challenges. I think for me, I had really broad interests, and so it was very hard to zero in on a specific area and to kind of like stick to that area and be disciplined around what is the scope of this, and remind myself that this is what I'm going to accomplish for this project, for this course, for this degree, and all of those other things I can do, but not right now. Like right now, this is what I'm going to try to, this is the question I'm going to try to answer. I think when I put my editorial hat on, the kinds of things that we see in manuscripts that come to the International Journal of Work Integrated Learning, some of the challenges there are that the questions that are the research questions that are defined aren't always aligned well with the methods that were used to collect the data. And so there needs to be alignment between the research questions. So if the research question is, how is something happening? Typically, you need some kind of qualitative data to answer that question. If you ask surveys, you're not going to understand questions of how or why. Typically the questions that you can answer in a survey are more the what or when. And so just making sure that the method used to collect the data aligns with the question that's being asked. And then I think if I kind of think through the whole process from defining a research question to collecting the data to doing the analysis of quantitative data is, in my opinion, and I've done both, is pretty straightforward. The process for it, sometimes you don't get the results that you're expecting to get, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. The analysis for qualitative data takes much more patience, much more discipline to go through and theme to ensure that there's some reliability to the themes that you're identifying, that if someone else was to read the same things, they would pick out roughly the same themes. All of that is much harder with open-ended or qualitative data, but the richness of it is can be so powerful from a research perspective. I can still remember conducting interviews with students for my dissertation research, and like I can hear the emotion in their voices still. So there's something pretty powerful about that kind of data. So yeah, I think my biggest suggestion is probably of a practical nature, in that this is part of your studies. Pick something that's reasonable. Doesn't mean you can't revisit, doesn't mean you can't change it, but you have a life ahead of you that you can do more research, figure out what is reasonable for the program and the course that you're in, and answer part of a question. I mean, my favorite part in writing any article is writing the implications. So like, why does this research matter? And the next steps. So I always have far more questions that come up after doing a research of, now I've answered this one little bit, but now I have this question and this question and this question that I now am curious about. So I think it's important to recognize that no research study is going to be perfect, and no research study is going to answer everything. There's always going to be more research that comes out of it.
Very good. You know that I read this article several years ago, and it has greatly influenced my practices as the director of the Center for Cooperative Education at SUT. I always emphasize on trust and clear expectations. You know that.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the student? Okay, I think this is the end. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Pretti, for your insightful and engaging lecture on successful will relationships, a framework for sustainability. Your detailed explanation of the research process and the development of the framework has given us a profound understanding of the critical factors that contribute to successful university industry communication, community engagement. Your lecture not only has broadened our perspective on view, but also provided an inspiring example of how regular lecture can inform and drive meaningful change in practice. Thank you once again for sharing your expertise with us today. It has truly been an honor to learn from you. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you.
Thank you all so
Yeah.
much. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.